Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to hear from ICIMOT, UNDP, and UNEP, and of course now we have Bhutan, Asia Foundation. It was really enlightening. But my question is, before I ask my question, let me share one finding from IPCC Climate Change and Land Report, I think somewhere in 2019. I think one of the findings was that land is both source and sink of greenhouse gas emission. Now, since students are here, let me explain this one. Land is a sink if you manage very well. If you add a lot of organic matters, if you grow trees, shrubs, that is where actually, you can capture carbon, and that serves as a mitigation. And if it is a source, if you mismanage, if you burn, if you do not take care, a lot of erosions, that is, a source of, a concern. And in Bhutan, if I bring some figures, with the improved land management, you can really cut down your erosion runs, loss of soils, as high as 24 metric tons per annum. You can see it. And I can also share that we are so dependent on our clean energy. Some figures we have seen that compared to other clean, hydropower generation, I believe that turbines' lifespan is around 20 to 25 years in a clean river system. But in our case, it's around 5 to 7 because of high, silt, that is flowing down the, by the river. But the question is, in most of the forum or discussion we have is, I'm not really getting why, like a mountainous country, or when you read the climate report, we always say mountainous landscapes are highly vulnerable to the climate change. But when it comes to resource allocation or prioritizing the your focus, it seems land is not getting a central attention. I believe in a mountainous country, we should have that. And I also know that probably even the climate change negotiation, mountain partnership is, I think, still not been actually the central thing. Like small islands, they are quite smart. They're into that. So I wanted to hear from each panelist here, what exactly can we do to bring more resources so that our farmers have a secured future as we move forward in this changing climate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dasho Chencho Norbu, thank you. I should have asked for the name, but I do know you. But for other speakers, when you speak up, if you could just identify yourself, please. So on his question, could I first start off with the lady on my right, Dr. Sharma? Could you just respond briefly, and then I'll turn around to each presenter then. Thank you.
Yeah, you can hear me, right? Okay. Thank you for the question. And this is exactly why I mentioned about the processes so far. So the first time, even the mountains were mentioned in 1990s. And then after that, after a span of more than 20 years. Very valid point. I think we are just also ICIMOT is basically about the region itself, about the member countries are not ICIMOT's member country. It's basically the region, and we are catering to those countries. So the idea is not only to have the mountain perspective, but associated with it, whether it is biodiversity, whether it is forest, whether it is land. So we are working very closely, and I'm happy that ICCI is also here. So with our next processes and the steps, we are working on towards unifying those voices and actually putting the elements together in the global discourses. For that, we need to require, basically coordination and engagement with the governments itself directly to work and take those things forward in the global processes. Nothing and it starts for example, in the upcoming Substar submissions. So we would be happy taking that as a note and taking it forward. Thank you.
Thank you. The next presenter who will answer would be Dr. Sering.
Thank you very much, Dasha. I think you're much more able to answer the question you posed to us. But you know, the three Rio conventions, we had a convention on biological diversity, we had a convention to combat desertification, and we had a convention on climate change. And I think we kept them quite separate. Forestry came into the UNFCCC process with reducing emissions from deforestation and degradation. We have Articles 4.8 and 4.9 of the UNFCCC that talks about requiring parties to take measures to minimize the adverse effects of climate change. I think what has happened, and you know, mountain countries in the process, we have tried to get together, and you know, you've talked about the Mountain Partnership, but like reducing emissions from deforestation and degradation, we had the Rainforest Alliance. We had countries, and they did really deep science in terms of what would deforestation, peatlands. So I think the way forward really is under the scientific body on scientific and technological advice, SBSTA, really to start to look at land. There's been quite a lot of work now with methane, the international methane, the IMEO, the observatory. There's quite a lot of resources on methane. There's some work on land, but if you start to look at I think it's difficult for mountain nations when you start to look at issues that alliance of small island states are facing. I think you really look at the immediate security threats. So I think we will be able to look at more research, but in terms of coming together with a narrative, I think for mountain nations that's been difficult. Thank you.
Right. I feel it's a similar story and rather familiar one that the conservationists have been talking about for a long time, how tigers and rhinos get all the resources and the critical, you know, to the ecosystem, if it is a tiny creature, whether it's a lizard or an ant or a pollinator or whatever it is, doesn't get attention. And I think if you look at how the distribution is, 2/3 is oceans, right? And there is land mass, and in the land mass, there is a very small proportion of that is mountains. But what has now become very important is to understand the combination of mountains and climate change. Whether it's cryosphere, whether it's landslides, whether it's floods, they all originate in mountains. So this message has to go out louder, more widely, perhaps from different corners in order to establish. And I think this is one of the challenges that organizations like ECMOD have already had and faced. And the climb is really high and uphill, but we need to start somewhere and we need to start doing something about it.
Thank you. So from what I've heard, can I be heard? It's not on. Thank you. From what I've heard, it's a couple of things: that more research, more discussion. You know, this is just a beginning. It's not the end. And if there's one thing that I take refuge, is the fact that this is the start. The meeting of minds. Maybe the minds haven't met yet, but this is a great forum that ideas are being exchanged, narratives are being constructed. We have no clear answers. And I want to join with my panelists that it's not the know-all and end-all. It's the beginning. The journey has just begun, just as we were going to share with the journey by Dr. Sharma. So perhaps we could also extend that offline later on for further discussions. That would really be great. I have an online question now, which I'd like to recite, and I think it will be on the screen. I can't turn back, but can you see it behind me? Everyone? Can you? Great, thank you. I'm just going to read it out for myself. Big promises of climate. It's from Dasho Sonam Wangdi, former NEC secretary. The point is big promises, example of climate finance, USD 100 billion or more per annum by developed countries. But what in reality is on the ground, LDCs have accessed, well, actually it's all there, you can read it, but no more than $2 billion from GCF without co-financing since its inception. Bhutan has accessed less than 100 million in the last 10 to 12 years, etc. Now, there's a leakage of the funds. How do we, this is the question, how do we bridge the financing gap and also reduce costs by accredited agencies? I'm not sure if my panelists can answer, but certainly, would anyone like to take it? I guess you would. That's great, because I heard she talked about GCF. So without further ado, let's have Dr. Sering answer that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dasho. And again, I have Dasha Sonam Piwondi, who's very well equipped to actually answer the question that he's posed to us. But I think if you start to look at the fact that Bhutan has accessed 100 million of climate finance and the 20 to 30% leakage by accredited entities. I think with the Green Climate Fund, the design was that you could have national accredited entities. The Green Climate Fund fees for, you have the UN agencies, you have multilateral development banks, and you have international NGOs who are accredited. But we also have national accredited entities, and in Bhutan, the Bhutan Trust Fund has become a national accredited entity, and I believe the 3 banks in Bhutan are also in the process of getting accredited to the Green Climate Fund. So the one aspect is, of course, you go with national accredited entities. But one of the difficulties, and I've raised why only 15% of LDCs have been able to access the Green Climate Fund resources, is that the kind of data, the kind of information needed, national accredited entities find it difficult. So I think you have to look at multilateral implementing entities. You look at the UN organizations as a stopgap. I know that when the Bhutan Trust Fund for Environmental Conservation became a national implementing entity of the Adaptation Fund, it was UNEP that actually did a lot of work with the BTF to help build capacity. And we did work with other agencies in different countries for it to become a national implementing entity. In order for Bhutan Trust Fund Environmental Conservation to become an accredited entity of the Green Climate Fund, it was a UN Capital Development Fund that actually did the capacity building. So I think you have to look at the UN as not a leakage of funds, but somebody who is brokering this process. And then we work really closely with national implementing, national accredited entities to build their capacity. And then the UN just provide technical expertise in Bhutan under the leadership of Carla Hershey. And you heard Carla. Carla's really looking at it from a Bhutan focus. The UN is there to support it. One of the challenges, and again, we all have ceilings in terms of resources. For the larger resources for Bhutan to access, I mean, you've heard about private foundations, but you have to go to multilateral development banks because they are able to mobilize the larger resources. Thank you. And Dr. Sonam, I think the lack of resources, I think we will continue to talk about the importance of climate change, importance of public resources for LDC, small island, landlocked developing countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Prasad, would you like to add any thoughts? If not, I will just move to the other presenters. No, thank you. I will now pass the mic to Ms. Hershey. She would have something to add. Thank you.
No, thanks very much. I think that Dachen said most that needs to be said about this. The UN's role in Bhutan at this time, it's our job to work ourselves out of a job. And in that whole process, we are here to develop the capacity of the various entities to take over a lot of the work that the UN has been supporting in terms of multilateral pooled funds for climate change and climate funding. So this process is ongoing. The new cooperation framework that will dovetail into the Royal Government of Bhutan's 13th year, 5-year plan, a lot of that is going to be underpinning and supporting the LDC graduation, as well as passing on that capacity to harness and to bring in the climate funds through the accredited agencies such as the Bhutan Trust Fund. So this is in process, and As Dutchan also rightly said, we stand ready to continue to provide technical assistance where that is still appreciated and wanted. But again, it's our job to work ourselves out of a job, and that's the goal, to leave it in the very capable hands of the Bhutanese people. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question, and thanks. It's been, most of it is answered, but just bringing on to again from our perspective, and it's not directly for the GCF, it's also for Adaptation Fund. We are facing issues working with the governments on accessing regional part of Adaptation Fund because, as you all know, ECMOD is the only accredited agency by Adaptation Fund in the region. And we are that window, and we would really request the government of Bhutan as well as other our member countries through this forum to please join hands and collaborate so that we can we can actually access those funds. And our role is not only being a kind of accessing those funds, but also in the process, capacity building, developing the enabling policies. So yeah, it would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma. I think the answer really lies in the steps taken by the institutions involved in trying to have criteria, working to strengthen the accredited agencies and the process of accreditation. And on one hand, we have also ECMOD saying they're the implementer, they need to work within their remit, and that's equally important. So there's a lot to be done, for sure, and this is really the starting and kicking off point for that. I hope we've answered Dasho Sonam Wangdi's question, and if not, perhaps you know the speakers, we could still prolong and discuss it offline and further in further venues. May I now take another question, please? Oh, I see two hands, very good. Could the lady, I'm sorry, could someone pass the mic to, yeah, thank you. Could you raise the hand? Sorry, he didn't, yeah, thank you. Could you identify yourself, please, first, and then put forth your question? Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Sange. I am a student from JSW School of Law. So first off, thank you so much to all the panelists. I enjoyed this session a lot. So my question is directed to Ms. Carla. So earlier you said that we can't depend on bigger organizations all the time. And I truly agree with that, rather than expecting it should start with us. So you further talked about bringing in private sectors and partnerships to make sustainable developments. So my question is, are we doing that? And if so, how? Also, I loved the concept of circular economy and making it a foundational premise. So in your opinion, how do we make this approach feasible both in practice and in framework? So I'm quite curious, and I'd love to hear you talk about it. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. And you know, I want to really appreciate that the students are asking questions. This is really lovely. Without further ado, I will pass it to Carla Hershey, and then I would like to flip it over to Dr. Sering, because she did also talk of private partnerships. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. If I answered your question, we would be here for several hours. So I need to point you into the direction of Kate Roswell, who developed this concept of the donut economics, but circular economy. If you go to donuteconomic.com, all of her information around this is free. She's made a concerted effort to make it available to all of us so that we can understand it. There's lots of training films there. But what she's really talking about, and what I was alluding to, that even though we may not have buckets of money coming into the country, it is how do we organize ourselves, right? How do business models, how are they developed? And if we develop it with sustainable development in mind, then our whole thought processes begin to change. You know, what is the purpose? Is the purpose just making money, growing the economy, which is the neoclassical version, or is our purpose about something else? And I think in Bhutan, we have already demonstrated through gross national happiness that there is already a foundation where this economic theory, donut economics, is very much part and parcel of how one could move forward. Mountain hazelnuts is a good example of direct foreign investment that is founded on a sustainable foundation. I know it's had a lot of ups and downs, and there's probably lots of whispers in the room, but it is one of the companies that was actually supported by the United Nations in its development because it met the milestones of really going back to its purpose and not just making profit, but making enough and making the members, the employees of the company to become stakeholders as something that is also to redistribute wealth and not just harness it for, shall we say, stakeholders that are members, stockholders and this type of thing. So I do believe that when direct foreign investment comes in, that there are ways and means in which Bhutan can insist that there are designs around the models of these new companies that would actually benefit the people in a very circular fashion. So I'm going to stop there because we can have a bilateral and I can point you in the direction of some more information on this, but there are ways to do it so that the people will benefit and it's not all about the owners of the companies. Thank you.
Thank you. The thirst for curiosity will never end, and I really appreciate it. So let me now pass it over to Dr. Sering.
If I say a little bit about circular economy, if you look at SDG 12 is responsible consumption and production. And basically what circular economy is really looking at consumption is how you consume and how you produce. And the most common statistics, that's thrown out is food waste. You look at the amount of energy and water it takes to produce food, and you look at food waste. So if you stopped food waste, and I was told, there was a statistics that if you stop food waste, it would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. So food waste is a good place to start. And you start to look, like in the Pacific Islands, they don't have space. And what they do is, you stop driving your car and then you leave it. And they have a problem of, dump yards, of old cars. And I had a colleague working with me in UNEP who was able to link with the Japanese in Kitakishu, where they were not getting enough scrap material. And we were able to get the Squire Shipping Group to agree to pick up all these vehicles, to take it to Kitakishu, and they were able to actually get value out of scrap material. So what we found now is, it's in the production. We're starting to look at the whole Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee on, plastics. And we're finding that it's difficult. We're starting to talk to sort of private companies because we're finding that some of the products, the way that you've put sort of images on bottles, you're not able to reduce it. So we're now thinking of, what would this mean in terms of reducing, reusing, but also in terms of the manufacturing and the design. Because if you look at, the traditional, homes in Bhutan, it's timber and then it's earth and it goes back. And you don't have that waste. So we're now looking at how do you reimagine a society where it's all the circularity. And I think, there's a World Circular Forum. There's a lot of work on circularity. And I think under Carla's leadership, we'd be very happy, the UN agencies, to come together in this area.
Thank you, Dr. Sering. We have time for one more question. Could the hand be raised? Yes, please. It's a lady at the front. Yeah, thank you. Could you just identify yourself? Thank you. Can someone help her, please? Thank you.
Thank you, esteemed panelists. I'm Tashpam, incoming DG for the Department of Environment and Climate Change. I'm very new in this space, so I understand that we are compelling ourselves that we have a shared prosperity and shared vulnerability globally. But at the same time, the reality is that dominance of power still along the economic dominance. My question is, with all these changes of climate financing and supporting LDCs, I want to understand whether do the LDCs get a share or space where we get preferences in the supply chain of technology? Because I understand that if at all we have to change, it's through technology that accelerations can happen, but I also understand that often LDCs are not placed outside the supply chain because of our purchasing power. And also my next question is that I understand that as nations we have been submitting our national adaptation plans. So what do the UN have a common solution to LDCs through all the national adaptation plans that are submitted by various countries? These are two questions. One is technology. How do LDCs enter the space of, enter the supply chain? And another one is from all the adaptation plans that we have submitted, what has come out of it for the LDCs?
Thank you. Let me just rephrase, so I want to be sure we've got your questions right. You had two questions. One was to LDCs. Do they get shared space in technology on supply chains? Is that right, ma'am? Okay, good. Thank you. The second one was the national adaptation plans. Does the UN have a common solution to that? Is that correct? Good. Thank you. May I know who would like to take the question from here? Dr. Sering? Go ahead. Thank you.
So, you know, under the UNFCCC, I said there was Article 4.8 and 4.9, and 4.9 is for least developed countries. So there is a recognition, there is a vulnerability for LDCs, and so we set up the least developed countries expert group, and we set up the LDC fund. The LDC fund, of course, is a voluntary fund, and I said it was 1.59 billion, out of which Bhutan accessed about 40 million. It's not adequate. It's not adequate for the needs of the LDCs, but it's a voluntary fund. And I think my colleague from Uganda said it very well, Philip Gwage, when we were fighting for the fund. He said, look, you know, when you're a family, you have children, and when they get tired, you give them a little meal before the big people eat. And this fund was for the children, so they could, you know, get strong. It's not adequate. The LDC, and I know Carla will go and go to the United Arab Emirates, where, you know, the least developed countries, they will be getting together, and I think the issue of financing is important. We have the Climate Technology Center Network. It's one of the constituted bodies under the UNFCCC, and you know, again, it's under-resourced, but there is access to resources for LDCs, small technical assistance resources, and I know there is sort of a technology, there is I'm tempted to say technology fund under UNDESA that's also looking at LDCs, but not adequate.
Just to answer the technology question, when I said, you know, the annual investments required is $3.5 trillion, what it means is that to decommission high emission assets and to invest in low emission or zero emission assets, that is the amount required. Now, if that is the market, obviously, you know, innovators will pursue the market. There will be technology, but the thing is, the access to technology will not come to the third world or the least developed countries for a while. We have to wait. So it's about bridging the time. For instance, to give examples of solar panels, the price of solar panels 20 years ago versus now, the difference is almost 75%. It's come down by 75%. But then we've had to wait 20 years for it to come down, so we are last in the line. So somebody's got to give us that opportunity to be not last in the line, but somewhere in the middle of the line. You know, that would be better.
before I pass it on to the next, the speaker, I would just want to add that, you know, you have the Global Stockade coming up, and that would be one good way to address that, plus other fora through the COP, because it's endless, yeah? Issues keep coming up, and that's the way to bring it forth to the fore. Without further ado, I would pass it on to the speaker. Thank you.
No, thanks very much. I don't really have that much else to add on this one, but to make the mental note that there is a tremendous amount of use of, say, green energy that has taken 20 or 30 years to be affordable, but taking also the low input route to many other areas where we tried to put in electric water pumps, for example, that really didn't last the test of time, but your tried and tested hand pump did. So also looking at low input technologies vis-a-vis what is really required in terms of high-end technology, I think is still something that we need to be watching and managing as we go through our processes. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope we've answered your questions, ma'am. Thank you. No, I want to make sure that we do, because we just don't take questions without wishing to have them answered fully or as best as we can. I think we are running short of time, but it's been such a fantastic session. I've been so pleased and happy with my presenters, and I want to thank them. I want to thank the organizers, and could you please, if you wish, join in to give a round of applause to the presenters with their insights. Thank you.